I don't remember much about my dad, except that he left when I was 2. There are no real memories, just vague images of a tall man walking out the door and never coming back. He sent child support checks, but that was the extent of his involvement. My mom, Sarah, had me when she was 20. Looking back, I don't think she ever really wanted to be a mom. She tried to be good at it for a while, but eventually, it became clear I wasn't part of her long-term plan. Sarah loved being the life of the party. She was always going out, meeting new people, and posting glamorous selfies on social media. Our house was like a revolving door of boyfriends, none of whom ever stuck around long enough to matter. For most of my childhood, I was left with babysitters or nannies. By the time I was 10, I didn't even bother asking her to stay home for movie nights or school events. It was easier to just be invisible. Things changed when I was 13. Sarah met Todd, a charismatic businessman in his early 40s. He wasn't like her usual boyfriends. He was stable, successful, and had a daughter, Khloe, who was my age. When Sarah introduced them to me, she kept emphasizing how important it was for us to get along. I remember sitting stiffly on the couch while Khloe smiled at me like we were already best friends. Todd seemed polite but distant, like he wasn't sure what to make of me. I didn't care. I wasn't looking for a new family. At first, Todd and Khloe were just guests who overstayed their welcome. They spent weekends at our house, and Sarah would go all out to impress them. I mostly stayed in my room, trying to stay out of their way. But soon, weekends turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Todd and Khloe practically moved in without anyone officially saying it. Sarah acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then came the bombshell. Sarah told me I had to share my room with Khloe. I still remember how casually she said it, like it wasn't a big deal. Khloe's room at her mom's house is smaller than yours, she said. She deserves a nice space here too. I was stunned. My room was my sanctuary, the only place in the house that felt like mine. I refused, flat out. That led to one of the worst fights we'd ever had. Sarah screamed at me, calling me selfish and ungrateful. I yelled back that she couldn't just take away the only piece of privacy I had. At one point, she even threatened to kick me out if I didn't agree. I was 14, but I knew she couldn't actually do that. Not legally, anyway. That didn't stop her from trying to scare me into submission. In the end, she gave up on the idea of us sharing a room and converted the basement into Khloe's bedroom. She spent weeks decorating it, making sure it was just as nice as mine. Maybe even better. Khloe moved in officially not long after, and that's when things really started to unravel. At first, Khloe acted sweet and friendly, like she genuinely wanted us to be close. But it didn't take long for her real personality to show. She was petty, manipulative, and seemed to take every chance she could to make me feel small. One day, when we were home alone, she laughed and said, "You know, your dad probably left because of you." I didn't even know how to respond. I just stared at her, trying not to cry. It only got worse from there. At school, Khloe had a group of friends who worshipped her. She turned them into her personal army, spreading rumors about me and making sure I felt like an outsider everywhere I went. If I said anything to Sarah or Todd, they brushed it off as teenage drama. "You need to try harder to get along," Sarah said once, like I was the problem. Todd didn't care enough to even pretend to take sides. The worst part wasn't the bullying or the constant feeling of being unwanted. It was the way Sarah started comparing me to Khloe in every possible way. "Khloe's grades are so much better than yours," she'd say. Or, "Why can't you be more outgoing, like Khloe?" It was like she'd decided Khloe was the daughter she'd always wanted, and I was just some kid she was stuck with. I started counting down the days until I turned 18. I didn't know where I'd go or what I'd do, but I knew I couldn't stay there. It was only a matter of time before Sarah and Khloe found a way to push me out for good. I wish I could say things got better as time went on, but they didn't. Khloe only got more comfortable taking over my life. She'd barge into my room whenever she wanted, borrow my clothes without asking, and complain to Sarah if I didn't let her have her way. Every time we fought, Sarah took Khloe's side. I stopped bothering to defend myself after a while. It never made a difference. Khloe wasn't just cruel at home. She made sure her friends joined in on the fun at school too. They'd walk past me in the hallways, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "There's Emily, the charity case," they'd say, or Did you hear her mom doesn't even like her? It didn't matter if it was true or not. People believed Khloe because she was charming and popular. I became invisible to everyone except the ones who wanted to laugh at me. By the time I was 16, I was barely holding it together. My grades were slipping, my confidence was gone, and I had no one to talk to. The few friends I had drifted away, either because of Khloe's influence or because I pushed them away, too ashamed to admit how bad things were. I spent most of my time in my room, reading or listening to music, trying to escape the constant tension in the house. Then came the night Khloe planted the first seed of her plan. It was a Friday, and Sarah and Todd had gone out for the evening. Khloe and I were home alone, which was never a good thing. I stayed in my room, hoping she'd leave me alone. But when I came out to grab a snack, she was waiting for me in the kitchen, smirking like she had something planned. You know, she said, casually sipping a soda, you should really stop trying so hard. Nobody likes you, Emily. Not here, not at school. You're just there. I didn't respond. I'd learned by now that arguing with her only made things worse. But as I turned to leave, she added, Don't worry, though. You won't have to deal with me much longer. Things are about to change around here. I didn't know what she meant, but the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't think much of it at the time, chalking it up to Khloe being her usual dramatic self. But looking back, I should have seen it as the warning it was. A few weeks later, Khloe put her plan into action. It started small, complaints to Sarah about how unfair I was to her. Emily's always mean to me, she'd say, pouting. I try so hard to get along, but she just hates me. Sarah, of course, ate it up. She started scolding me for things I hadn't even done. Why can't you be nicer to Khloe? She'd say, as if Khloe's constant torment didn't matter. Then came the night everything fell apart. I had just gotten out of the shower when Sarah started banging on my door. Emily, she yelled, get out here right now. I opened the door to find her standing there with Todd and Khloe, all of them looking furious. Sarah stormed into my room and pulled out a plastic baggie from under my bed. Inside was what looked like weed. Next to it were 2 empty beer bottles. My heart dropped. I had no idea where any of it had come from, but Khloe's smug expression told me everything I needed to know. I can't believe this, Sarah said, shaking the bag in my face. How long has this been going on? Do you think I'm just going to let you ruin your life and mine? It's not mine, I said, my voice shaking. I don't even know where that came from. Khloe gasped, her eyes wide with mock innocence. You're blaming me? Really? I can't believe you'd stoop that low. She looked at Todd, who put his hand on her shoulder like she was the victim. Don't lie, Emily, Sarah snapped. You're already in enough trouble. I tried to explain, but it didn't matter. Sarah had already made up her mind. She went on a tirade about how I was ungrateful, how I'd wasted every opportunity she'd given me, and how I'd become a burden to the family. Then she said the words I'd been dreading for years. You need to leave. Tonight. I stared at her, stunned. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, tears streaming down my face. I don't care, she said coldly. You're almost 18. You need to figure it out. Todd didn't say a word. Khloe stood there, biting back a grin, as if she'd won some twisted game. I packed my things in silence, taking only what I could fit into 2 garbage bags. No one said goodbye when I left. I walked out the door and didn't look back. That night, I sat on a bench in the park with everything I owned. The air was cold, and I had no idea what to do next. My phone was dying, but I managed to call Megan, my best friend. She picked up on the first ring. What's wrong? She asked, her voice full of concern. I broke down, telling her everything. She didn't hesitate. Come to my house, she said. Right now. I didn't know it then, but that phone call would change everything. Megan's house felt like a different world. When I arrived, she was waiting at the door in her pajamas, pulling me into a hug before I could even say a word. Come on, she said, grabbing one of my garbage bags. Let's get you inside. Her parents, Linda and Mike, were sitting in the living room when we walked in. Linda's face immediately softened when she saw me, while Mike stood up and took the other bag from my hand. What happened? Linda asked gently, motioning for me to sit down. I didn't know where to start. Megan jumped in, explaining the basics. My mom kicking me out, the lies, and how I had nowhere else to go. By the time Megan finished, Linda looked horrified. "That's awful," she said, shaking her head. "You're staying here. No arguments." I tried to protest, mumbling something about not wanting to be a burden, but Mike cut me off. "You're not a burden, Emily," he said firmly. "We're happy to help." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words until they were spoken. For years, I'd felt like an unwanted extra, a problem no one wanted to solve. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relief. That night, I slept on a cot in Megan's room. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't care. I had a roof over my head, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. Megan stayed up with me, letting me vent about everything that had happened. "I always knew Khloe was awful," she said, shaking her head. "But planting drugs in your room? That's next level." "Sarah believed her," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "She always does." Megan didn't say anything, but the look on her face said it all. She was angry. For me, not at me, and I didn't know how to process that. No one had ever been on my side like this before. The next morning, Linda and Mike sat me down to talk about what was next. "We're going to help you get through this," Linda said. "First things first, you're staying here as long as you need to. No pressure, no deadlines." I nodded, trying not to cry again. "But we need to figure out school and work. Have you thought about college?" College felt like a dream I'd given up on years ago. My grades had slipped so much that I doubted I'd even get accepted anywhere, but Linda was optimistic. "We'll start small," she said. "Community college is a great option. Let's focus on getting you back on track." Megan's parents weren't just offering me a place to stay. They were giving me a lifeline. They helped me apply to local colleges, found me a part-time job at a bookstore, and even paid for therapy sessions to help me process everything I'd been through. It was overwhelming at first, but I was determined to make the most of their generosity. Over the next few months, I slowly started to rebuild my life. I got accepted into a community college and threw myself into my classes, determined to prove to myself, and maybe to Sarah, that I was capable of more than she'd ever given me credit for. Working at the bookstore helped me regain a sense of independence, and I started saving up money to eventually get my own place. Living with Megan's family was an adjustment. They were warm and kind in ways I wasn't used to. Linda made me breakfast every morning and asked about my day when I got home. Mike gave me advice on budgeting and offered to teach me how to change a tire. It was strange, being cared for like this, but it felt good. I started to believe that maybe I deserved it. Megan was my rock through it all. She'd been my best friend for years, but this was different. She went out of her way to make me feel like I belonged, whether it was dragging me to a movie when I was stressed or staying up late to help me with homework. "You're going to do amazing things," she told me one night. I just know it. It wasn't easy, though. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, replaying the moments Sarah told me to leave. Sometimes I wondered if she ever regretted it, if she ever thought about me at all. But I couldn't let myself dwell on that. Sarah had made her choice, and I had to make mine. I wasn't going to let her or Khloe define me anymore. By the time I turned 19, I had saved enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment. Linda and Mike helped me move in, and Megan cried when I told her I was leaving. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," I joked, hugging her tightly. Standing in my new apartment, surrounded by secondhand furniture and boxes of thrift store dishes, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I was finally free to create a life on my own terms. And for the first time, I believed I could actually do it. Moving into my tiny studio apartment was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. It wasn't much: peeling paint on the walls, a fridge that made strange noises, and a shower that barely got warm. But it was mine. After years of feeling like a guest in my own home, this space, however imperfect, felt like freedom. I threw myself into building my new life. My classes were going well, and I worked extra shifts at the bookstore to cover rent and save a little on the side. I even started going to the gym, not because I cared about losing weight, but because it gave me a way to channel my stress. Slowly but surely, I was figuring things out. Megan and her family stayed in my corner. Linda still called every week to check in, and Megan visited constantly, helping me decorate my apartment with thrift store finds and bargain bin treasures. "You're making this place look so cute," she said one afternoon, holding up a mismatched set of curtains we'd found for $5. "It's like a Pinterest board, if Pinterest had a broke college student section." I laughed, and for the first time in years, I realized how light I felt. The weight of Sarah and Khloe's toxicity was finally lifting. But, as much as I wanted to leave my past behind, it had a way of creeping back in. About a year after I moved out, I decided I was ready to start dating. It wasn't an easy decision. After everything I'd been through, trusting people didn't come naturally. But I wanted more for myself, and part of that meant opening myself up to the possibility of love. That's when I met James. We matched on a dating app, and while his profile was charming, I didn't have high expectations. My previous attempts at dating had been awkward at best and disastrous at worst. But James was different. From the moment we met, he made me feel comfortable in a way I wasn't used to. On our first date, we went to a hole-in-the-wall diner, and I remember thinking how easy it was to talk to him. He asked about my interests, my goals, and my favorite movies. Not in that superficial, first-date way, but like he genuinely wanted to know. By the end of the night, I found myself smiling more than I had in years. James and I started seeing each other regularly, and before long, he became a constant in my life. He was funny, kind, and supportive, but what stood out the most was how much he believed in me. When I doubted myself, he'd remind me how far I'd come. "You've already done the hard part," he said once, after I told him about my past. "Everything else is just icing on the cake." It wasn't until a few months into our relationship that James told me about his family. His dad owned a chain of hardware stores, and James was set to take over the business one day. At first, I worried that our lives were too different. He came from stability and wealth, while I was just starting to find my footing. But James never made me feel less than. To him, I wasn't defined by where I came from but by where I was going. About a year after we started dating, James asked me to move in with him. The idea of sharing a home with someone was daunting, but I trusted him. Living with James was different from anything I'd experienced before. He respected my space and made me feel safe. His family welcomed me with open arms, especially his mom, Claire, who quickly became like a second mother to me. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. James's family celebrated my achievements, no matter how small. When I graduated from community college and got accepted into a university, Claire threw me a party. "You're part of the family now," she said, hugging me tightly. Life was good, better than I'd ever imagined. I was working part-time, finishing my degree, and building a future with someone who truly cared about me. But just as I thought I'd left my past behind for good, it found a way to creep back in. Things started unraveling the day I posted about James and me getting engaged. It wasn't anything over the top, a simple photo of us at the park, my hand on his chest with the ring in full view. The caption read, "Can't wait to spend forever with you, Red Heart." My phone blew up with congratulations from friends, classmates, and even James's extended family. I was on cloud nine. Then, a name I hadn't seen in years popped up in my inbox, Khloe. The email subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." I froze. I hadn't heard from her, or Sarah, for that matter, since the day I left. For a moment, I debated deleting it without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. The email was a long, rambling apology. Khloe admitted to planting the drugs and beer bottles in my room, saying she had hated me out of jealousy. She claimed she was young, insecure, and didn't know how to deal with sharing her dad's attention. She apologized for all the cruel things she'd said and done, even acknowledging how much she'd hurt me. At the end, she wrote that she hoped we could reconnect and put the past behind us. I didn't buy it. Khloe wasn't the type to feel genuine remorse, at least, not without an ulterior motive. And the timing felt far too convenient. Why now, after all these years? I decided to do some digging. It didn't take long to figure out what was really going on. Khloe was married now, to a man named Eric, and from what I could gather online, they ran a business together. Eric's company supplied packaging materials to restaurants and retail chains. Scrolling through his LinkedIn profile, my stomach dropped. I recognized the name of his company because it was one of James's family's suppliers. I couldn't believe it. Of all the people in the world, Khloe had somehow ended up connected to my life again. It wasn't hard to piece together what had happened. She must have seen my engagement post, realized I was marrying into a family her husband worked with, and decided to reach out. Her email wasn't about making amends. It was about damage control. That night, I told James everything. I explained who Khloe was, what she had done to me, and why I thought her email was less about guilt and more about business. James listened quietly, his face unreadable, until I finished. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I'll talk to my dad about it tomorrow." The next morning, James and his dad, Ron, reviewed their contracts with Eric's company. It turned out they had already been considering ending the partnership. Eric's prices were high, and the quality of his products had been declining for months. Ron decided it was time to switch suppliers and instructed his legal team to terminate the contract. A week later, Eric was officially informed of the decision. James told me that Eric had taken the news professionally, but Khloe's reaction was another story. She started posting on social media, accusing James's family of sabotaging their business. In one particularly nasty post, she wrote, "Some people hold grudges forever, even when you try to make things right. Guess money can't buy class." She didn't name me outright, but the implication was clear. At first, I tried to ignore it. I blocked her accounts and told myself it wasn't worth engaging. But Khloe didn't stop. She emailed me again, this time accusing me of ruining her life and demanding that I convince James's family to reinstate the contract. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" she wrote. "We're losing clients left and right because of you. Fix it." Her words stung, even though I knew they shouldn't. Rationally, I understood that Khloe and Eric's struggles were their own fault. Their business had been declining long before I entered the picture. But part of me still felt guilty, like I was somehow responsible. James, however, wasn't having it. "She's trying to manipulate you," he said firmly. "You don't owe her anything, Em. Not after what she put you through." Hearing him say it out loud helped me let go of the guilt. Khloe wasn't my problem anymore, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her mess. Ron decided to take legal action against Khloe for her defamatory posts, which had started gaining attention online. His lawyers sent her a cease and desist letter, demanding she remove the posts and issue a public apology. Khloe responded by doubling down, claiming she was being targeted unfairly. It was a mess, but James's family handled it with the professionalism I admired so much. Through it all, James stood by me. "She's not worth your energy," he said one night, as we sat on the couch planning our wedding. "We have too much to look forward to. Let her dig her own grave." He was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let Khloe or Sarah define my story. I had worked too hard to rebuild my life, and I wasn't about to let their chaos drag me down again. The defamation case against Khloe didn't take long to resolve. Ron's lawyers were relentless, and Khloe had no real defense. She was forced to take down her posts, issue a public apology, and pay damages. Watching her crumble under the pressure was strangely satisfying, but I didn't dwell on it. She was a chapter of my past, one I was finally ready to close. With that drama behind us, James and I turned our full attention to the wedding. The day arrived faster than I expected, and as I walked down the aisle, everything else faded away. James stood at the altar, his smile calm and steady, and I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Megan teased me about our awkward teenage years, and Ron gave a toast about how proud he was to have me as part of the family. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere completely, without question or conditions. After the wedding, James and I left for our honeymoon in Greece. As we walked along the cobblestone streets, hand in hand, I realized how far I'd come. My past no longer felt like a weight dragging me down. It was just a story, one that had shaped me but didn't define me. I wasn't the scared, lonely girl sitting on a park bench anymore. I was stronger, happier, and finally free. This was my life now, and it was only just beginning.